I'm going to be ranking more physical traits by how revolting and repelling they are to women. Traits in the S tier are the most effective at repelling women, and traits in the D tier are the least effective at repelling women. So let's get right into it. Women are very attracted to a man's hands. Of course, that's only if a man has nice hands. If a man has unattractive hands, then it can really hurt his chances with women. There are several factors that go into what makes a man's hands attractive, but one of the most important factors is hand size. Generally speaking, larger hands are seen as more attractive to women. So if you have small hands, then women will find you creepy and repulsive. And small hands is also one of those things that will make women view you as weak. And this is an instinctual thing, by the way, so women might not even realize what it is about you that they find so disgusting. But if you have small hands, then women will think you are weak and pathetic. They just will. It's kind of like how, to men, a woman's hip to waist ratio subconsciously signals her level of fertility, so relatively wide hips is something that men find highly attractive. A man's hand size subconsciously signals to women his level of physical strength. So it's just something that they instinctually find attractive. And there is some truth to the whole notion that a man's hand size correlates with his physical strength. Bigger hands are correlated with greater grip strength. That's a fact. And in a modern context, men with larger hands do have advantages in most sports. An obvious example is basketball. If your hands are large enough to palm the ball in one hand, then it makes it a lot easier for you to handle the ball. But pretty much any sport that involves using your hands, you're gonna have a big advantage if you have larger hands. Now, there probably is some size at which your hands could be so big for your body that it starts to be unattractive, but that would be such an excessively rare case that it's really not even worth talking about. Like, if you're 5 feet tall, but you have a hand size equivalent to the average 6.5 foot tall man, then that's still probably not too big. Having big hands is a good thing, and small hands is bad. I know a lot of people will argue that hand size only matters relative to your height, but that's not true. If you are 6'6", but you have hands the size of the average 6'2" man, then your hands would be small relative to your height, but it wouldn't really detract much from your overall looks because your hands would still be large compared to the overall male population. And likewise, if you are 5 feet 2 inches tall, but you have hands the size of the average 5'7" man, then your hands would be large relative to your height, but women would still view your hands as being small and unattractive since, compared to the overall male population, your hands would still be smaller than average. If you don't know whether or not you have small hands, then it's pretty easy to measure. Hand length and hand width are both important factors in determining the overall size of your hands, but length and width do tend to be correlated, so generally speaking, you can just measure your hand length, and that should be good enough to tell you where you stand. So all you have to do is measure the distance from the tip of your middle finger to the base of your palm, and then check your measurement against this chart. So if your hand length is 7.6 inches, then you have perfectly average sized hands. But we all know that women only find the top 20% of men attractive, so it's probably safe to say that anything less than 80th percentile hand length would be considered unattractive. So according to this chart, 80th percentile hand length for a man is at 7.94 inches. So anything less than that, 7.94 inches, anything less than that is going to detract from your overall attractiveness in the eyes of women. I know it might not seem intuitive, but hands are very important when it comes to how women view you. So small hands is an A tier physical feature that repels women. Next up, let's talk about being ginger, which means you have red hair and freckly skin. In general, red hair is seen as a feminine trait, so just like any other feminine trait, women view it as unattractive. And that's also why red hair is usually seen as an attractive trait for women to have. But when it comes to being ginger, the hair color itself actually isn't the biggest problem. It is seen as feminine and unattractive, but it really is a small thing in comparison to other facial features, and it's also something that theoretically could be easily fixed with hair dye. But the bigger problem with being ginger is what it means for your complexion, your skin complexion. Gingers tend to be covered in large freckles from head to toe, which is something that women find highly repulsive. And if you're covered in freckles, there's nothing you can do to fix your hair either, because if you dye your hair a darker color, but you still have freckles, it's obvious that you've dyed your hair, and it also just looks wrong. You know, when you see somebody covered in freckles, the expectation is that they have red hair. And if they don't, then it just looks wrong. You know, it looks like some kind of optical illusion or something. And it's not attractive. It's weird. And honestly, it might sound a bit harsh, but if your hair color does not match your skin complexion, it makes you look like some kind of mutant or something. Like you're one of the X-Men. And not in a good way. And believe it or not, most women do not want to date a mutant. Now, it does vary person to person how much the ginger condition affects their skin. A lot of redheads are covered in freckles, but some redheads really don't have many freckles at all. And something to keep in mind is that when it comes to physical traits that women find unattractive, physical traits pertaining to your physical shape are much more important than those that merely affect your appearance. And being ginger is just a matter of appearance. It doesn't have anything to do with your actual bodily proportions. However, with that said, a lighter complexion will make you look less muscular overall, just due to shading and contours and all that stuff. So, in a sense, being ginger does affect your physical shape. However, it is a small effect in the grand scheme of things. So, being ginger is an unattractive trait, but I can't put it too high since it's only a matter of complexion and color. It doesn't affect your actual shape. So I'm putting being ginger in the C tier. Okay, being poorly groomed. And by that, I mean things like having a bad haircut, long fingernails, a neck beard, a unibrow, things like that. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because it's such a simple fix that it's barely even worth talking about. Like, of course, if you have long fingernails and a neck beard, then you're pretty much going to be like a walking woman repellent. But it's pretty easy to just shave your neck and clip your fingernails. Getting a good haircut is a little bit more difficult, but as long as you have a full head of hair, you should be able to figure something out. Just go to a decent salon and tell them to make it look good. They'll probably do a good enough job. Of course, if you have an ugly face, then there's no such thing as a good haircut. But in that case, grooming isn't your problem anyways. Your face is the problem. So things like long fingernails and a unibrow, they're probably A tier in how unattractive they actually are. But since these things are extremely easy to fix, I'm putting being poorly groomed in the D tier. A long chin, sometimes referred to as the Habsburg jaw or the Habsburg chin, it's one of those features that is universally ugly, whether it's on a man or a woman. The most famous examples of a long chin are probably Jay Leno or John Kerry, and there's also me, of course. I'm not going to put a picture of my face on here, but I do suffer from this particular affliction, although in my case, it's probably not as bad as Jay Leno. But as a kid, people did used to say I looked like him. I used to get that all the time. And during the 2004 presidential election, a lot of people used to tell me that I looked like a young John Kerry. But anyways, yeah, a long chin is a very unattractive trait. It makes you look like you have a horse face, and it just throws all of your facial proportions out of whack. But fortunately, if you are able to grow a decent beard, as long as your long chin isn't like crazy long, you can probably hide it to some degree just by growing a beard. But it really just depends. I mean, it's kind of like having a recessed chin because it pretty much is the inverse of that. So you might be able to hide it with a beard, but if it's really bad, then you're just screwed. You know, there's no hiding it if it's bad enough. Now, I will say, I don't think having a long chin is quite as bad as having a recessed chin, because a recessed chin is ugly, but in a weak, feminine way. But a long chin is ugly in a more masculine direction. I mean, just think about it. A recessed chin goes inward, but a long chin sticks out. It's like a penetrating spear. I mean, it's not going to help you penetrate anything, but it is powerful in a way. Not in a good way, but I'm just saying, it's better to have a long chin as opposed to a recessed chin. But seriously, because it is a masculine feature, it is possible for a man with a long chin to still be attractive as long as he has other facial features that are attractive. And I don't think the same can be said about a recessed chin, at least not to the same degree. So a long chin certainly is an unattractive facial feature, but it's not the worst thing in the world. B tier. We already talked about having a long chin, but there's another repulsive physical trait that often comes along with a long chin: the underbite. There's something about an underbite that is just viscerally disgusting. It makes you look unintelligent, unhinged, lower class, and just gross. I think it might be because having an underbite can give you a similar appearance to a person that's missing teeth, just because of the way it makes your jaw sit in a resting position. And it can also affect the way you speak in a way that makes you sound like you might suffer from a cognitive impairment. And I've noticed that a lot of times in TV shows, when an actor is supposed to be playing a low IQ character, they'll actually push their jaw forward to make it look like they have an underbite. Think like Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys or Gomer Pyle from the Andy Griffith Show. I don't really know where the association comes from, but for every millimeter of underbite you have, you lose 5 IQ points in the eyes of women. I don't care if you're literally giving your PhD dissertation on nuclear physics. If you have an underbite, every woman in the audience is going to be freaking out, wondering who let a deranged crackhead into the lecture hall. Because that's something else about underbites. It makes you look homeless and or drugged out. It just looks wrong, like something's wrong with your brain. Thankfully, an underbite usually can be fixed with orthodontics, and it might be expensive, and it might even take years to fix depending on how bad it is, but it usually is fixable. But still, it's just such a repulsive trait to have. I can't put it any lower than the A tier. So, A tier. A protruding brow ridge is an extremely masculine feature. I mean, it is the true sign of a caveman. Depending on how far your brow ridge sticks out, a protruding brow ridge might actually be an attractive feature because, like I already said, it's masculine. But also, it can help give you the appearance of having deep-set eyes, which is another highly attractive feature. So, a bit of a protruding brow ridge is actually a good thing. But if your brow ridge protrudes too much, then women will think you're a Cro-Magnon that broke out of the display at the Science Museum, and they will fear for their lives, in a bad way. But still, since a large brow ridge can be an attractive trait, I can't rank it too high on the list. There's more men out there that need more brow ridge rather than less. And even if you do have a Frankenstein brow ridge, there are women out there that will go for that because it signals a high level of testosterone. So women are repelled by a protruding brow ridge if it's protruding past a certain point, but it's really not the worst feature you could have. C tier. Okay, so we already talked about a recessed chin, and we talked about long chins and underbites, so I think it's only fair we talk about cleft chins as well. A cleft chin is a masculine feature, so it's something that is usually unattractive on a woman, but on a man, it's usually either neutral or it can actually be a positive thing. In fact, in cases where a cleft chin does look ugly on a man, if you really pay attention, you'll probably notice that the cleft isn't the problem. It's probably the shape of the chin itself being either too long or too pointy or something like that that is the real problem. So a cleft chin actually is not an unattractive feature at all. The only reason I'm including it on this list is because so many guys seem to think that it's an ugly feature, when in reality, it's not. But one thing I will say, if you have an otherwise unattractive chin with a cleft, the cleft will draw more attention to it, and that is not a good thing. So in a way, in some cases, a cleft chin could be a bad thing, but in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with a cleft chin, and in fact, I would say it's more likely to be an attractive trait than even being a neutral trait. D tier. The eye area is arguably the single most important part of the human face. A good eye area signals fitness and virility in a way that the female brain registers on a very deep instinctual level. So, obviously, it is crucial for a man to have an attractive eye area if he wants to have any hope of ever ascending. If you consume looksmaxing content about the eye area, there's a lot of talk about hunter eyes, deep-set eyes, canthal tilt, and eye color, amongst other things, but the feature I want to talk about now is something that rarely gets discussed. Probably because it's so obviously ugly, there's no reason to even argue about it. If both of your eyes do not point in the same direction, then women will find you absolutely repulsive. Period. Having a lazy eye or being cross-eyed might be the single most hideous physical trait a man can have. And even if you did manage to attract a woman, what's going to happen when you try to have that classic romantic moment where you both gaze into each other's eyes longingly? She won't even know which eye to look at. So she'll probably just get frustrated and do a 360 and just walk away. But don't worry, if you have a lazy eye, you're never going to get that far to begin with. There are corrective surgeries you can get to fix a lazy eye, so there may be some hope, but from some quick research, Success rates of the corrective surgery are only 60 to 80%, and I don't know, if you ask me, those aren't the best odds. And apparently, those odds don't even tell the full story because there are cases where somebody gets the corrective surgery and it works perfectly at first, but then after a few years, the lazy eye drifts back to how it was before the surgery. So, yeah, a lazy eye is really, really bad. You know, in general, when it comes to physical traits that are attractive versus physical traits that are unattractive, if you want a quick and easy way to evaluate any particular trait, here's what you can do. Just ask yourself, is this trait something that would contribute to a man's ability to effectively hunt large prey with a throwing spear? If the answer is yes, then boom, that is an attractive trait. But if the answer is no, then it's not looking so good. So, when it comes to having both of your eyes not even facing the same direction, I mean, how are you supposed to hit your target from a distance when one of your eyes is looking straight ahead and the other one is looking at your feet? And if you think I'm being ridiculous, then think again. Seriously, I challenge you to think of one attractive feature a man can have that would not contribute to his ability to hunt large prey with a throwing spear. Go ahead, pause the video, and see if you can think of anything. Because I know you can't. So, being cross-eyed or having a lazy eye, it's bad. It's really bad. And it's ugly. It's unattractive, and it's repulsive. Women find it disgusting and despicable. Having a lazy eye or being cross-eyed, it's easily an S tier physical trait that repels women.